The new sound of paradise. The late morning sun, already warm with the promise of summer, glinted off the pitted chrome bumper of a battered Ford F350. It coughed and sputtered, a mechanical death rattle echoing through the usually tranquil Paradise Township. Strapped precariously to its flatbed, a hand-painted sign, Mac's Fix-It Shop, swayed with every lurch, its faded red letters flaking like sunburned skin. Mac, a man whose permanent scowl seemed etched by years of oil stains and bad luck, wrestled the heavy truck down the narrow lane. A cloud of acrid diesel smoke trailed behind him, a stark contrast to the scent of honeysuckle that usually perfumed the air. He backed the truck, groaning, into the cavernous, disused barn that was to be his new domain. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight piercing the grimy windows. Tools, still in their cardboard boxes, lay scattered across the concrete floor, awaiting their designated places. Mac kicked a stray wrench. "Slow as molasses in January," he muttered, addressing no one in particular, his voice a gravelly rumble. He uncapped a thermos, pouring out a stream of lukewarm, muddy coffee that tasted suspiciously of burnt toast. "And this swill ain't helpin'." He surveyed the chaos, the unhung signs, the unopened crates. A deep sigh escaped him, laden with the weariness of a man who'd seen too many broken-down engines and not enough good days. He had a schedule, a precise mental timeline for setting up, and this was not it. Meanwhile, a short distance away, Sarah knelt in her garden, her hands deftly coaxing errant weeds from around her burgeoning rows of tomatoes. The gentle hum of bees provided the primary soundtrack to her morning, occasionally punctuated by the distant, jarring clang of metal from Mac's barn. She paused, a small furrow forming between her brows as the clang grew louder, followed by what sounded suspiciously like a frustrated shout. The noise was a new, unwelcome guest in the familiar symphony of her life. Her bonnet, crisp and white, framed a face that held both the serenity of her faith and a quiet strength. Her garden, a vibrant tapestry of greens and reds, was a testament to patience and careful tending, qualities that seemed utterly foreign to the cacophony emanating from down the road. She brushed a speck of soil from her apron, her gaze drifting towards the source of the disturbance. The sight of the rusty truck, now partially obscured by the barn, felt like a smudge on a clean pane of glass. Later that afternoon, the air in the meeting hall of the Paradise Township Church was thick with a different kind of tension. Bishop Levi, his face a study in solemnity, addressed the gathered elders. "Brothers, we have a matter of some concern before us." His gaze swept across the room, settling on each man in turn. "A new English establishment has opened its doors, or rather, its barn, on the edge of our community." Elder Samuel, a man whose beard was as white as his convictions were firm, cleared his throat. "I have seen this Mac's Fix-It Shop. The machinery, the noise. It is not of our ways. It speaks of a world we strive to keep at a distance." "Indeed," Bishop Levi affirmed, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "Our young ones, they are impressionable. Such a presence, so close, could tempt them with ideas that stray from the path of righteousness and simplicity." He clasped his hands, resting them on the worn wooden table. "We have always been careful to preserve the sanctity of our community, to uphold the ordinances handed down through generations. This new neighbor, with his fix-it ways, presents a challenge to that preservation." Elder Thomas, a man known for his thoughtful demeanor, spoke next. "Perhaps we should extend a hand, invite him to understand our customs, to respect our quietude." Bishop Levi considered this for a moment, then shook his head gently. "Brother Thomas, while your heart is good, the nature of this particular Englishman, from what little I have observed, suggests a more direct approach might be necessary. His presence, his work, it is inherently disruptive to the peace we cherish. We must consider the long-term impact on our faith and our children." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "We need someone who can speak with him, someone who embodies the wisdom and gentle strength of our community, someone who can articulate our concerns clearly, yet with grace. All eyes in the room turned to Sarah, who sat quietly among the women, her hands folded in her lap. She felt the weight of their collective expectation, a familiar sensation. Her heart, however, felt a flicker of something new, a mixture of trepidation and an unexpected curiosity about the man whose arrival had so quickly stirred the placid waters of Paradise Township. The elders' concerns were valid, their fears understandable. But a tiny, insistent voice in the back of her mind wondered if there wasn't more to this new disturbance than met the eye, or the ear. A reluctant envoy. The scent of damp earth and blooming petunias usually brought Sarah a profound peace, but this morning the aroma was tainted. A metallic tang, acrid and foreign, drifted on the gentle breeze, slicing through the familiar pastoral symphony of buzzing bees and distant cowbells. It was the smell of Mac's shop, an unwelcome addition to Paradise Township's quiet landscape. From her garden, where she meticulously pruned a wilting rose, Sarah could hear the incessant clang of metal on metal, a jarring counterpoint to the chirping sparrows. She sighed, her gaze drifting towards the disused barn that now pulsed with an unsettling energy. Later that afternoon, a gentle rap on her kitchen door announced Bishop Levi. He stood tall, his beard a silver cascade, his eyes usually twinkling with benevolent wisdom, now clouded with concern. Sarah offered him a glass of cool well water, which he accepted with a nod. "Sister Sarah," he began, his voice a low rumble. "The council met this morning regarding our new neighbor." Sarah knew exactly to whom he referred. The disruption was palpable, a crack in the carefully constructed serenity of their community. "Mac, the mechanic," she stated, her voice calm, though a flicker of disquiet stirred within her. Bishop Levi nodded, his gaze fixed on the sun-drenched fields beyond her window. "His presence, Sarah, is a challenge to our way of life. The noise, the fumes, the constant coming and going. It stirs the young ones, tempts them with the world outside." He paused, his brow furrowed. "We have always strived for simplicity, for separation. This man, with his English ways, he threatens to unravel the threads of our community." Sarah remained silent, listening. She understood the elders' fears. Their faith was a delicate ecosystem, easily disrupted by external influences. "We believe," Bishop Levi continued, turning to face her, "that you are the one to speak with him." Sarah's breath caught. She had anticipated the council's concern, but not this. "Me, Bishop?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She was known for her quiet strength, her unwavering faith. But confronting an outsider, especially one so seemingly entrenched, felt like an immense burden. "Your calm demeanor, your unwavering faith, Sister Sarah," he explained, "will be a testament to our steadfastness. You possess a quiet strength that commands respect. We believe you can make him understand the importance of our traditions, the sanctity of our peace." He met her gaze, his eyes earnest. "You must impress upon him the need for him to relocate, to find a place where his enterprise will not infringe upon our spiritual well-being." The weight of his words settled upon her. It was not a request, but a sacred duty. She pictured Mac, a blur of motion and grime, his scowl a permanent fixture. How could she, a simple woman of faith, persuade such a man to abandon his livelihood? A knot tightened in her stomach. The task felt insurmountable. She thought of the impressionable youth, their eyes wide with curiosity as they peered towards the barn, drawn by the forbidden allure of the outside world. She remembered the hushed conversations among the women, the subtle shift in the air since Mac's arrival. The elders were right. Something had to be done. Her community's spiritual health depended on it. A wave of apprehension washed over her, swiftly followed by a quiet resolve. She had always upheld the traditions, walked the path laid out for her. This was no different, merely a more challenging stretch of the road. She would be an envoy for her people, a voice for their cherished way of life. She looked at Bishop Levi, her gaze steady. "I will speak with him, Bishop," she affirmed, her voice clear and unwavering. "I will do what is asked of me." A flicker of relief crossed Bishop Levi's face. "May the Lord guide your words, Sister Sarah," he said, rising to leave. After he departed, Sarah walked back to her garden, her hands still stained with earth. The metallic scent from Mac's shop seemed stronger now, an almost physical presence. She looked at her hands, strong and calloused from years of tending the earth, of weaving intricate quilts, of baking bread for her family and community. These hands, usually engaged in acts of creation and sustenance, would now be tasked with a mission of polite yet firm eviction. She closed her eyes, picturing Mac's perpetually scowling face. A tremor ran through her, a mix of trepidation and an unexpected, almost forbidden, spark of curiosity. She had a difficult conversation ahead of her, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a ripple of true uncertainty about what the morning would bring. She had to prepare. She had to steel herself, and she had to remember why she was doing it. For paradise, for her people, for the preservation of their cherished peace. The next morning, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, Sarah donned her plainest dress and shawl. She felt like a soldier preparing for battle, though her only weapons were her faith and her resolve. First, sparks. The scent of roasted corn and freshly turned earth usually filled the air of Paradise Township. Today, however, a metallic tang, sharp and acrid, cut through the familiar aromas as Sarah approached the edge of the community. Mac's shop, a corrugated tin structure that seemed to have sprung up overnight, belched a plume of dark smoke into the clear morning sky. The rhythmic clang of metal on metal echoed, jarring against the gentle hum of nature that typically defined their days. Sarah clutched her straw bonnet, a nervous habit, though the sun was still climbing. She had dressed in her plainest gray, a silent statement of purpose and humility. Each step felt heavy, leading her toward a place that felt utterly alien. A battered pickup truck, its hood propped open like a gaping maw, sat outside the shop's wide bay door. Inside, she could glimpse the silhouette of a man, wrench in hand, framed by the glare of a bare bulb. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped across the invisible line that separated the quiet order of her world from the chaotic energy of his. The ground beneath her boots was no longer smooth, packed earth, but a rough mix of gravel and oil-stained concrete. The air vibrated with the roar of an engine being revved, then abruptly silenced, leaving a ringing echo in her ears. Mac emerged from beneath the truck, wiping grease from his brow with a rag that was more grime than cloth. His hair, dark and unruly, fell across his forehead, and a smudge of oil adorned his cheek. He was taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his faded work shirt. He glanced up, his eyes the color of stormy skies, meeting hers for a fleeting moment before dismissing her with a grunt. He probably thought she was just another curious local, drawn by the novelty of his presence. "Morning," he grumbled, not bothering to lower the wrench he held. He gestured vaguely toward the edge of the property. "Not much to see here, ma'am. Just a repair shop." His tone was gruff, impatient, clearly indicating he had no time for idle chatter. Sarah's resolve, which had felt so firm under Bishop Levi's gaze, wavered slightly. This man was not easily swayed, but the peace of her community depended on her. She straightened her shoulders. "I am Sarah," she stated, her voice surprisingly steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. "I've come to speak with you about your establishment." Mac finally lowered the wrench, leaning against the truck's fender, his arms crossed over his chest. A faint smirk played on his lips, a mixture of amusement and annoyance. "Sarah, right. Another one of Bishop Levi's emissaries, I presume?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Look, I'm just trying to make an honest living here. This is my property, and I'm not bothering anyone." "With respect, Mr. Mac," Sarah began, choosing her words carefully, "your shop is bothering us. The noise, the fumes, the temptations you bring. They disrupt the peace of our community. Our way of life is simple, centered on faith and quiet contemplation. Your presence here, so close to us, threatens that." Her gaze swept across the array of tools, the half-disassembled engine, the bright, garish calendar tacked to the wall inside the shop. Everything here was a stark contrast to the unadorned beauty of her home. Mac's smirk vanished, replaced by a hard line. Temptations? What in blazes are you talking about? He pushed off the truck, taking a step toward her. The air suddenly felt charged, taut with his irritation. I'm a mechanic, not a snake oil salesman. I fix cars. That's it. Our young men, Sarah continued, unflinching, they are drawn to the novelty, to the machines. It pulls them away from their duties, from the spiritual path. We cherish our children's innocence, their connection to God. Your shop, it offers a different path, one that we do not wish for them. She took a small step back, not out of fear, but to emphasize the distance between their two worlds. For the sake of our community's harmony, we ask that you consider relocating. There are other places, further away, where your business would not infringe upon our peace. Max stared at her, his jaw tight. The clang of metal from inside the shop, where a younger apprentice must still be working, suddenly sounded louder, more aggressive. Relocate? He repeated, a harsh laugh escaping him. Lady, I just sank every penny I have into this place. This is my home now. And you think I'm just going to pack up and leave because your peace is being disturbed? His voice rose, tinged with disbelief and a building anger. I have a right to be here. This land was bought fair and square. I'm not going anywhere. Sarah met his gaze, her own unwavering. The air crackled between them, the initial awkwardness replaced by a raw tension. This was not going to be easy. Debates over coffee and bread. The scent of warm yeast and toasted grains was becoming as familiar a fixture in Mac's garage as the acrid tang of oil and exhaust fumes. Every few days, without fail, Sarah would appear at the wide bay door, a linen-wrapped loaf cradled in her arms. Mac would grumble, sometimes just a low growl under his breath, sometimes a direct, impatient huff, but he never turned her away. Their debates, if one could call them that, continued. Sarah, unwavering in her mission, would stand amidst the clatter and clang of his work, her voice a calm counterpoint to the screech of grinding metal. She spoke of the peace of Paradise Township, the gentle rhythm of life disrupted by his roaring engines, and the constant stream of traffic. Her arguments were always framed within the context of community, of shared harmony, and the preservation of a way of life. Mac, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that was perpetually stained, would counter with the brutal realities of commerce. "Harmony don't pay for parts, ma'am," he'd retort, his voice gravelly, cutting through the air like a rusty saw. "This here is an honest living. I ain't selling no spirits, ain't running no gambling dens, just fixing what's broke." He'd gesture expansively with a wrench, encompassing the clutter of his garage, the half-disassembled engine block, the tires stacked like black dominoes. "And I got every right to do it here." One particularly blustery afternoon, a fine dust swirling in through the open bay, Sarah arrived with a loaf that was still radiating warmth, the crust a deep, inviting brown. Mac was hunched over a sputtering carburetor, a deep frown etched into his brow. He didn't look up immediately, only grunted in acknowledgement of her presence. Sarah, accustomed to his brusque manner, simply placed the bread on a relatively clean workbench, careful to avoid a puddle of oil. The silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic drip of oil and Mac's frustrated mutterings, stretched. Sarah watched him, her gaze surprisingly steady. He eventually straightened, rubbing the small of his back, and finally met her eyes. There was a flicker of something unreadable there, perhaps weariness, perhaps a touch of grudging respect. "You always got time for bacon, then?" he asked, his tone less confrontational than usual, almost conversational. Sarah offered a small, hesitant smile. "It is part of our way, Mr. Mac, to provide." He grunted again, then surprised her completely. "Coffee's on," he said, gesturing with his chin towards a battered percolator simmering on a hot plate in a corner. "Strong, black, no sugar, no milk, just how I like it." Sarah blinked. She hadn't expected the offer. Her community eschewed such worldly indulgences, but refusing a direct offer of hospitality, even from Mac, felt rude. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Mac." He poured 2 mugs, the ceramic chipped and stained, steam rising in a fragrant cloud. He handed one to her, the heat seeping through the thick ceramic. Sarah took a tentative sip. The bitterness was intense, unlike anything she'd ever tasted, but there was a surprising warmth that spread through her, chasing away the chill of the afternoon. Their debates continued, but a subtle shift had occurred. Now, Sarah would often find herself holding a steaming mug as she articulated the concerns of her community, and Mac, rather than merely scoffing, would sometimes pause, wiping his hands slowly, as if genuinely considering her words. He still disagreed, vehemently so, but the sharp edge of his initial dismissal seemed to have dulled, replaced by a more thoughtful, if still stubborn, resistance. The pattern of their unique meetings solidified. The fresh bread, the strong coffee, the familiar rhythm of their opposing viewpoints. Sarah learned to anticipate Mac's sarcastic retorts, and he, in turn, began to recognize the quiet resolve in her eyes. She started to notice the meticulousness with which he approached his work, the surprising gentleness of his large hands as he handled delicate engine parts. He, for his part, occasionally found himself admiring the simple elegance of her attire, the serene composure that seemed to emanate from her even amidst the chaos of his garage. One afternoon, as Sarah prepared to leave, the empty breadbasket tucked under her arm, Mac surprised her again. "That last loaf," he said, wiping down a workbench, not looking at her directly. "The one with the seeds. That was good." Sarah paused, a genuine smile touching her lips. "It was rye, with caraway. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Mr. Mac." He just grunted, but it was a softer sound than usual, almost a contented one. As Sarah walked back towards the quiet lanes of Paradise Township, the lingering taste of bitter coffee on her tongue, she couldn't help but feel a tiny, unexpected spark of something akin to hope. The wall between them, she realized, was still formidable, but a few small bricks, she mused, might have just come loose. Unexpected common ground. The air in Mac's garage was a pungent tapestry of motor oil and hot metal, a sharp counterpoint to the fresh, yeasty scent of the rye bread Sarah had just set on the counter. Mac, wiping a fresh smear of grease from his hands onto a rag that had long since surrendered to its fate, gestured toward a jumble of tools. "See this particular set? Cheap knockoffs. Won't last a season of real work. You always get what you pay for." Sarah, pouring herself a robust cup of the coffee Mac now reliably offered, arched an eyebrow. "Is that why your implements look like they've survived a century of conflicts? A testament to their initial craftsmanship, or simply your stubborn refusal to part with them?" A low chuckle vibrated in Mac's chest. "Both. Quality steel holds an edge, keeps its temper. Nowadays, everything's engineered to fail, so you're forced to replace it. Planned obsolescence, they call it. My creed? Fix it right, fix it once. Otherwise, you're just applying a temporary patch to a deeper issue that'll resurface." He absently spun a worn crescent wrench, its handle gleaming smooth from countless hours of friction. The same philosophy applies to mending. You can slap a bandage on a fractured limb, or you can properly set the bone. One path leads to lasting strength, the other, perpetual fragility. "We understand that principle deeply," Sarah affirmed, her voice calm but resolute. "A poorly mended plowshare will inevitably snap again, usually at the most critical moment. A loose wagon wheel, left untended, risks splintering an axle, or worse." Mac paused, the wrench still in his grip. He shot a surprised glance at Sarah. "Plowshares and wagon wheels, you say? So you're familiar with agrarian machinery?" Sarah took a slow sip of her coffee, a faint, almost imperceptible curve playing on her lips. "I was raised on a farm, Mac. Our lives hinge on our implements, simple as they are. We learn their rhythms, their groans, the subtle shifts that signal trouble. While we may not have engines, the physics of friction, leverage, and structural integrity are universal. You learn to interpret the creak of a harness, the shudder of a tiller encountering stone. You learn to preempt disaster. Mac leaned against the workbench, genuine curiosity replacing his usual guarded posture. So you've actually handled tools yourself? More than a few, she conceded. My father taught me to replace a broken spoke, reshoe a horse, mend a harness, even how to fine-tune the tension on a reaper's blade. He believed everyone should understand the mechanics of the tools they depend on and how to maintain them. A reaper's blade, huh? Mac repeated, his gaze distant, as if visualizing the precision. That's exacting work. If the angle's off even a hair, your cut's uneven. If the balance is wrong, you'll tear the entire machine apart. He met her eyes, a newfound respect dawning. Most people today wouldn't distinguish a piston from a spark plug, much less know how to adjust a reaper. Sarah nodded. It's about grasping the underlying mechanics, isn't it? The chain of cause and effect, how each component influences another. It's a language in its own way, the vernacular of moving parts. Mac found himself nodding in agreement, a rare occurrence. Exactly. It's all interwoven. You can't just treat the symptom, you have to diagnose the root cause. That's the artistry. The true satisfaction isn't merely in restoring function, it's in comprehending why it failed, and then enhancing it beyond its original state. He then launched into an animated recounting of a particularly obstinate engine, a vintage car he'd resuscitated after another mechanic had declared it irredeemable. His hands moved expressively, miming the extraction of a carburetor, the meticulous cleaning of jets, the precise calibration of timing. Sarah listened, captivated. She observed the fervor ignite in his eyes, heard the devotion in his voice. He wasn't merely a boisterous presence. He was a master craftsman, a relentless problem solver, driven by an almost sacred commitment to his trade. The grease beneath his fingernails, the faint perfume of gasoline clinging to his clothes, these were not merely markers of his distinctiveness, but insignia of his dedication. In his narratives, she recognized her own community's steadfast adherence to quality, to honest toil, to the profound contentment of a task meticulously executed. The medium differed, steel and combustion versus wood and muscle, but the foundational principle resonated. As Mac concluded his story, a triumphant grin spreading across his face, Sarah found herself mirroring his smile. So, you rescued it from the brink, then? Purred like a contented cat, Mac affirmed, a gleam of victory in his eyes. The customer was ecstatic, said it hadn't run that smoothly in 2 decades. He held her gaze, and for a moment, the customary tension evaporated, replaced by a quiet, shared understanding. 2 disparate worlds, 2 distinct approaches, yet a mutual esteem for the intricate ballet of creation and repair. The low thrum of the garage, once an unsettling intrusion, now felt almost like a familiar pulse. A helping hand. The midday sun beat down, baking the asphalt in front of Mac's garage. He was attempting to reverse his ancient olive-green Ford pickup, a vehicle that looked as if it had survived several apocalypses, into a more convenient parking spot. With a groan of protest from the engine, a cloud of exhaust plumed from the tailpipe, smelling faintly of burnt oil and regret. Mac wrestled with the steering wheel, his brow furrowed in concentration. The truck lurched backward a few feet, coughed violently, and then, with a final wheezing sigh, died. The sudden silence that followed was jarring, broken only by the distant bleating of sheep. Mac leaned back against the seat, a string of colorful curses escaping his lips under his breath. He tried the ignition again. The starter motor whined weakly, a sound akin to a tired cat. Nothing. He tried again, pumping the accelerator pedal with a hope that bordered on delusion. Still, nothing. He slammed his palm against the dashboard, a futile gesture of frustration. This old brute had been his faithful companion for years, a testament to his own philosophy of making things last, and now it had chosen the most inconvenient moment to stage a full-blown rebellion. Just as he was about to climb out and lift the heavy hood, a calm voice cut through the quiet. "Having a spot of trouble, Mac?" He turned to see Sarah standing a few feet away, her straw hat shading her eyes. She carried a basket overflowing with freshly picked green beans, their ends still damp from the morning dew. A faint, earthy scent clung to her clothes, a blend of soil and sunshine. He felt a familiar flicker of annoyance, then a surprising warmth. He'd grown accustomed to her presence, to the quiet way she observed the world around her. "The old girls decided to pack it in," he grumbled, gesturing vaguely at the lifeless truck. "Stubborn as a mule, this one." Sarah set her basket down carefully on the pristine concrete. Without a word, she walked around to the front of the truck. Her movements were fluid and efficient, devoid of any wasted effort. She reached for the hood release, her fingers deftly finding the latch. Mac watched, surprised. Most people would have offered sympathy, maybe a suggestion to call a tow truck. Sarah, however, was already taking action. The hood groaned open, revealing a tangle of wires, hoses, and an engine block that looked like it had seen better centuries. Sarah leaned in, her gaze sweeping over the components with an almost clinical intensity. Mac, still seated in the cab, found himself mesmerized by her focused expression. He half expected her to recoil from the grease and grime, but she seemed completely unfazed. "Sounds like a fuel issue," she announced, her voice thoughtful. She pointed a slender finger at a metal line running from the fuel pump. "Could be a blockage, or the pump itself is failing." Mac finally climbed out, his heavy work boots thudding on the ground. He stood beside her, his arms crossed over his chest, a mix of skepticism and grudging admiration on his face. "You know a thing or two about engines, then?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his tone. Sarah looked up, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Grew up on a farm, Mac. Tractors, balers, reapers, they all run on engines. You learn to listen to them, to understand their aches and pains." She picked up a stray wrench from the toolbox Mac had left open. "Ever try tapping the fuel line when it acts up?" He raised an eyebrow. "That's an old trick," he admitted. "Sometimes works, sometimes doesn't." "Worth a try, though, isn't it?" She handed him the wrench. Her touch was surprisingly firm. "You crank it, I'll tap." He hesitated for a moment, then took the wrench. It felt natural in his hand, a familiar weight. He returned to the driver's seat, while Sarah positioned herself near the fuel line. He turned the key. The starter whined its weak protest. Just as he was about to give up, he heard a series of light, rhythmic taps from under the hood. He tried the ignition again. This time, the starter motor spun with a little more conviction. A faint cough came from the engine, then another, stronger one. With a final sputtering roar, the old engine caught, rattling to life with a familiar, if somewhat rough, idle. Max stared at the dashboard, then back at Sarah, who was now smiling, her hands dusted with a fine layer of grime. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, genuinely astonished. "You actually did it." "Just a temporary fix," she said, wiping her hands on a clean rag he'd left draped over the fender. "The pump's on its way out, or the filter's clogged. You'll need to get it properly looked at." He felt a genuine surge of gratitude. This was different from their usual spirited debates, from the intellectual sparring they'd engaged in. This was practical, immediate help, freely offered. It was a tangible act of connection. A bridge built not of words, but of shared understanding and a willingness to lend a hand. He looked at her, truly seeing her not as an adversary, but as someone who genuinely understood the language of machines, the art of making things work. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, the words feeling a little awkward on his tongue, but sincere nonetheless. "That was unexpected." She simply nodded, her smile softening. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes and a bit of practical knowledge are all it takes. She picked up her basket of beans. "Let me know if you need another tap." As she walked away, the scent of fresh vegetables mingling with the lingering smell of exhaust, Mac watched her go. He felt a shift within him, a softening of the hard edges he'd built around himself. The old truck idled steadily, a testament to her quick thinking. He had come to this community expecting resistance, perhaps even animosity. He had found instead a helping hand. And it was a hand that was slowly, but surely, beginning to dismantle the walls he'd so carefully constructed. The quiet hum of his truck's engine felt like a new beginning. The wrench slipped, clattering against the asphalt with a metallic clang that echoed in the sudden quiet. Mac grunted, wiping a streak of grease across his forehead with the back of his hand, oblivious to the new dark smear. "Stupid, stubborn piece of junk," he muttered, glaring at the engine's guts. Sarah, crouched beside him, a smudge of oil on her cheek mirroring his, chuckled softly. "Perhaps it is not the truck that is stubborn, Mac, but the mechanic," she offered, her eyes twinkling. He shot her a mock-indignant look, but a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Oh, so now it's my fault the fuel line's got more kinks than a garden hose after a dogfight." "A little patience," she advised, her fingers, surprisingly strong and nimble, already probing a different section of the hose. "And a gentle hand." She produced a small, worn piece of leather from her apron pocket, and with practiced ease began to clean a connection Mac had overlooked. Her movements were fluid, unhurried, a stark contrast to his own frustrated jabs. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the occasional rattle of a tool, the soft hum of insects in the warm afternoon air, and the distant clip-clop of a buggy passing on the road. Mac found himself observing her, not just her efficient hands, but the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the quiet determination in her posture. He'd never encountered anyone quite like her, someone who could be so utterly calm amidst the chaos of a broken engine, who found a quiet joy in the methodical process of repair. He located the specific crimp in the fuel line she'd been hinting at. "Aha!" he exclaimed, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "You're a magician, Sarah. How did you even—" She simply smiled, a genuine, open smile that reached her eyes. "My father taught me much. He always said a good horse and a reliable engine are much the same. They respond to care." As they wrestled with the line, trying to coax it back into shape, Mac found himself laughing more freely than he had in years. He recounted a particularly disastrous repair job from his early days, involving a runaway lawnmower and an unfortunate incident with a prize-winning petunias patch. Sarah listened, her laughter musical, a sound that resonated deep within him. Their frustrations were shared, their small victories celebrated with a glance or a nod. There was a camaraderie between them, an easy rhythm that felt less like two strangers working together and more like old friends. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and freshly cut hay. Mac leaned back on his heels, a thin film of grease covering his hands, but a wide, genuine smile on his face. The truck, though still not purring perfectly, was breathing again, a testament to their combined efforts. He looked around, really looked, at the quiet street, the meticulously kept gardens, the soft glow from the windows of nearby houses. The usual rush and din of his own world felt miles away, replaced by a profound sense of peace. He'd always dismissed the Amish way of life as restrictive, even backward. But now, watching Sarah meticulously wipe down her tools, her face serene in the twilight, he saw something else entirely. A beauty in the simplicity, a strength in the tradition, a quiet dignity he hadn't perceived before. The rhythmic ebb and flow of their days, once alien, now held a strange allure. Sarah, sensing his gaze, looked up. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, something shifted between them. The easy friendship that had blossomed over wrenches and oil felt deeper. A warmth bloomed in Sarah's chest, unfamiliar yet undeniably pleasant. It wasn't the comforting affection she felt for her family or her community. This was different, a delicate stirring, like the first shoots of spring pushing through the thawing earth. It was a feeling for Mac, specifically for his gruff exterior and the surprising kindness beneath, for his booming laughter and the way he looked at her with such genuine interest. It was a new emotion, one that hinted at a path she hadn't considered, a path that stretched beyond friendship into uncharted territory. Mac cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious. "Well," he said, pushing himself to his feet, "I think that'll hold it for now. Enough to get it to the shop, at least." Sarah nodded, rising gracefully. "It was good to help, Mac." Her voice was soft, and her eyes held a lingering warmth that made his own heart beat a little faster. As he watched her turn and walk away, the rustle of her dress the only sound, Mac felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't loneliness, not exactly. It was more a longing for the easy companionship they'd just shared, a quiet understanding that had grown out of grease and frustration. He realized, with a jolt, that he didn't just respect Sarah, he genuinely enjoyed her company, and that, for Mac, was a revelation. The elder's concern. The comforting aroma of polished pine and beeswax, usually a balm, felt stifling to Sarah today. Her gaze found rebellion in the sun-dappled dust motes, dancing in defiance of the room's weighty silence. Across the formidable oak table sat Bishop Levi and two elders, their faces a carefully composed study of concern and expectation. For weeks, hushed whispers had amplified into knowing glances. Sarah's frequent trips to Mac's garage, initially framed as communal duty, had morphed into fodder for quiet speculation. Her explanations, once accepted as diligent efforts to uphold the community's peace, now seemed to unravel. She'd always been a woman of unwavering integrity, yet the elders, with their astute perception, saw beyond the facade of her reports. Elder Tobias, his snowy beard a stark contrast to his dark vest, cleared his throat, a low rumble preceding his words. "Sister Sarah, we've observed your continued engagement with the English mechanic." He paused, letting the statement resonate. "And we've noted the distinct lack of progress in relocating his trade." A flush crept up Sarah's neck. Her fingers, intertwining in her lap, mirrored the knot of tension in her stomach. "I have spoken with him, Elder Tobias," she replied, her voice steady despite an internal tremor. "I've conveyed our community's desires, emphasized the importance of our way of life." Bishop Levi, his silver hair catching the light, leaned forward slightly. His eyes, typically warm and paternal, now held a sharper glint, piercing Sarah's composure. "Yet, Sister Sarah," he said, his tone gentle but firm, "he remains, and your visits, we cannot help but notice, have become more frequent and, dare I say, extensive." The unspoken accusation hung heavy. Sarah's thoughts flickered to Mac, his brow furrowed over a stubborn bolt, the easy camaraderie that had blossomed over shared coffee and rhythmic clanging tools. She recalled the crinkle around his eyes when he laughed, the unexpected tenderness of his touch guiding her hand on a wrench. These were details she could not divulge here, not to the elders. "My visits serve my mission, Bishop Levi," Sarah stated, her voice regaining its usual calm. "To understand his perspective, to forge common ground. It is no simple task to sway a man of his resolve." She chose her words meticulously, masking any hint of burgeoning admiration. Bishop Levi's unwavering gaze seemed to bore into her. "We sent you, Sarah," he said, his voice dropping, "because of your quiet strength, your clear mind, and your steadfast devotion to our customs. We entrusted you with the delicate task of safeguarding our community's peace, not to engage in prolonged discourse that yields no fruit." He paused, then continued, a deep sadness coloring his voice. "We are concerned, Sister Sarah. Concerned that your mission's purpose has become obscured. Concerned that your heart, perhaps, is being led astray." The words struck Sarah with the force of a physical blow. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the room's stillness. Led astray. The phrase echoed, a stark warning. Had she allowed herself to grow too close? Had the shared laughter, the quiet understanding, the nascent spark of something new, truly jeopardized her standing in her community? "My devotion to our ways remains steadfast, Bishop Levi," Sarah insisted, her chin rising instinctively. She met his gaze, drawing upon an unexpected wellspring of inner resolve. I understand your concern, but I believe understanding is the first step towards resolution, and sometimes understanding takes time. Elder Samuel, silent until now, spoke. His voice, softer than Tobias's, was no less firm. Time, Sister Sarah, can also foster attachments. Attachments not in keeping with our separation from the English world. We observed you, Sarah, assisting the man with his vehicle, a task that seems beyond the scope of your original purpose. A fresh wave of heat washed over Sarah's face. The vivid memory of her hands, grease-stained, working alongside Max, returned. The satisfaction of the repair, the quiet triumph in his eyes, the subtle current that had hummed between them, it all rushed back. It had felt so natural, so right in the moment. Now, under the elder's scrutiny, it felt like a transgression. I was merely offering assistance where needed, Elder Samuel, she explained, striving for an even tone. A small act of neighborly kindness. Bishop Levi sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. Kindness is commendable, Sarah, but not when it compromises your spirit or our community's principles. Your mission was to persuade, not to become intertwined. We need to know, truly know, where your heart lies in this matter, Sister Sarah, for the sake of your soul and for the peace of Paradise Township. The weight of his words pressed down on her, leaving her breathless. The choice, she realized with stark clarity, was no longer just about Mac's shop. It was about her, about the path she would choose. The hush in Bishop Levi's office was not the familiar, soothing quiet Sarah knew from shared meditations. This was a charged, heavy stillness, punctuated only by the soft rustle of aged pages as Levi turned a leaf in his Bible. Sarah sat across from him, her hands tightly clasped in her lap, the polished tabletop a cold weight beneath her touch. How could she articulate the surprising kinship she discovered amidst the intricate dance of gears in Mac's cluttered garage? How could she convey the way his calloused hands, so different from her own, somehow mirrored her meticulous nature? Sarah, Bishop Levi began, his voice surprisingly gentle, yet underscored by an undeniable gravity. The elders and we have noted your frequent visits. They have been lengthy, and the mechanic, he is not of our community. Sarah drew a breath, the air thick with the scent of old paper and beeswax. Bishop Levi, I went there to speak with him, as you requested. She sought for the right words, hoping to paint a vivid picture of Mac's unwavering dedication, his insistence on quality, the near reverence with which he treated his engines. He is a man of integrity. His work, it is honest, true. Levi's gaze, usually so benign, sharpened. Honest work, yes, but his methods, his life, they are English. And your mission was not to foster kinship, Sarah. It was to guide him to understand our needs, to persuade him to relocate his trade. He paused, allowing his words to settle. Tell me, daughter, have you succeeded? The question hung in the air, a chilling echo of the truth she'd been evading. Sarah's eyes dropped to her hands, the faint working calluses a stark counterpoint to the smooth compliance Bishop Levi's words demanded. No, Bishop Levi, she confessed, her voice barely a breath. He has not agreed to leave. The admission felt like a physical burden settling upon her chest. Memories of Mac's earnest explanations, his quiet passion for his craft, played through her mind, deepening the sting of her failure. How could she have asked him to abandon something so intrinsically him? Bishop Levi leaned forward, his expression now unyielding. Sarah, you were chosen for this task for your wisdom, your steadfastness. You know our ways. You understand the vital importance of our path, distinct from the distractions of the English world. His voice, once a comforting balm, now resonated with the stern authority of his office. You took vows, Sarah, vows of devotion to our community, to the path laid out for us by our Lord. Each word struck like a hammer blow, driving the wedge deeper between her duty and her burgeoning feelings. The tranquil order of her life, once a source of solace, now felt like a confinement. She recalled the quiet evenings with Mac, their shared laughter over a stubborn bolt, the way his eyes crinkled when he elucidated a complex engine part. These moments, once seemingly innocent, now stood in stark opposition to the solemn promises of her faith. "We observed you," Bishop Levi continued, his tone unwavering. "Helping him, working alongside him. Your hands, Sarah, were on his tools. Your heart. Where was your heart in those moments?" The question stripped her bare. A flush of warmth rushed to her face, a betraying blush that confirmed the truth of his observation. Her heart had indeed been there, in those moments, a fragile bud unfurling in the unexpected warmth of Mac's presence. The intricate mechanisms of the engine, the scent of oil and grease, had somehow interwoven with the unfamiliar aroma of Mac's company, forging a new, compelling world she hadn't known existed. A profound realization washed over Sarah. This was more than a mission failed, it was a crisis of her very essence. The gentle current of her life had been irrevocably diverted, and she now stood at a precipice. The community's path, clear and well-trodden, stretched behind her, while before her lay an uncharted, perilous landscape. The choice, she now understood with chilling clarity, was far more momentous than she had ever imagined. The magnitude of her predicament settled upon her, a crushing weight, pressing down until she felt she could barely draw a breath. The air in the room, once merely still, now felt suffocating. Her heart, indeed, was heavy. The crunch of gravel beneath Sarah's boots was a dirge, each step dragging her further from the meeting house and deeper into the wilderness of her own conflicted thoughts. The elders' rebukes still stung, a discordant chorus of duty and disappointment, but it was Bishop Levi's parting, sorrowful gaze that truly pierced her. No words were needed. The message was stark. She had strayed, not merely from her assigned task, but from the very blueprint of her existence, laid out since birth. The sun, once a benevolent presence, now felt like an unforgiving spotlight, laying bare the raw, aching chasm that had opened within her. On one side lay the familiar landscape of her life, the steady rhythm of the butter churn, the hushed sanctity of Sunday service, the comforting harmony of her sister's laughter, the interwoven burdens and joys of community. It was a life meticulously crafted, woven with robust threads of tradition, faith, and belonging, forming a vibrant tapestry of certainty. On the other, a hazy, uncharted territory beckoned. It thrummed with the faint, insistent pulse of an engine, Mac's engine, a sound that, until recently, had been an anathema, a jarring intrusion in the placid quiet of her world. Now, it was a siren's call, luring her towards an unknown horizon. Her hands, calloused from years of domestic labor, clenched at her sides. These were hands shaped for mending garments, for nurturing gardens, for rocking cradles. Could they also find purpose in tracing the oil-stained contours of a worn wrench, in the unexpected thrill of diagnosing a failing piston? A profound, life-altering choice loomed, stark and uncompromising. To choose Mac meant to actively reject everything she had ever known. It entailed turning her back on the furrowed fields of her upbringing, on the gentle counsel of her mother, on the unwavering trust of her community. It meant severing ties that had bound generations, tearing a rent in the fabric of her identity that might never mend. The thought sent a cold tremor through her, a primal fear that stole her breath. Yet, when Mac came to mind, a different sensation bloomed, a quiet warmth, a profound recognition that defied articulation. She envisioned his hands, strong and adept, coaxing vitality back into inert metal. She heard his voice, gruff yet kind, elucidating the intricate ballet of gears and pistons. She recalled the comfortable, shared silences between them, a wordless understanding as they worked in tandem, their synchronized movements a silent dialogue. He truly saw her, not merely as Sarah, the dutiful Amish woman, but as the Sarah who intuitively grasped the language of machines, who appreciated the integrity of a well-crafted tool, who found beauty in the elegant simplicity of an engine's design. He respected her intellect, challenged her assumptions, and in doing so, had unveiled a world beyond the fences of her community. A world where meticulousness wasn't just a tenet of faith, but a universal principle of good workmanship, irrespective of the practitioner. A world where connection could forge itself in the most unexpected corners, bridging divides that once seemed insurmountable. The path she'd always trodden had felt like a smooth, well-worn lane. Now, she stood at a pivotal crossroads, where one road led back to the familiar, albeit with a heavy heart, and the other plunged into a dense, uncharted wilderness. Each forward step on this new trajectory would be a deliberate act of defiance, a quiet rebellion against the expectations that had sculpted her very being. She would become an outsider, a wanderer, a woman who had chosen a different song. She paused at the edge of the sprawling hayfield, its golden stalks swaying gently in the breeze. In the far distance, barely audible above the rustle of the wind, was the distinct, resonant hum. It wasn't the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer or the soft whir of her mother's spinning wheel. It was a modern sound, an English sound, yet it resonated deep within her. It was the uncertain melody of a future she hadn't dared to envision, a tune composed of wrench turns and shared glances, of quiet understanding and unspoken promises. And as she listened, a faint tremor of excitement, fragile yet persistent, began to intertwine with the profound ache of her conflict. Her life would be redefined. She just didn't know how.